I'm probably the target of the most well-financed corporate retaliation campaign against a lawyer in the history of our country. It's the first time indigenous peoples from the Amazon have taken an oil company to court and won a big judgment that has freaked out Chevron. It's freaked out the oil industry generally. And I think one reason they're so vicious about going after me is because I had a lot to do with that happening. We won the judgment in Ecuador, so they came to New York and sued me, and they got sued for $60 billion. The judge then appointed a private corporate law firm to step into the shoes of the U.S. government and prosecute me in the name of the government. I found out that this private corporate law firm had Chevron as a client. These companies have literally trillions of dollars of environmental liability around the world because they don't clean up the crap they're dumping. They never pay. So the idea that these indigenous peoples could get this amount of money would basically threaten their entire business model.
Thank you for sitting down with me. This is definitely a very interesting interview for me. It's outside the norm of some of the things that I do, but I think still super applicable for one of my fundamental curiosities and yearning in life, which is to figure out the truth. And you exposed truth and essentially got to justice with truth and were then put on the complete other side of it. So we're out here in California, but you live in New York. So what are you up to out here in California other than doing me this honor of sitting down with me?
Well, that's so kind. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And great respect to you for what you do and what you've done. I travel a lot because I'm always enlisting support for the work I do, which is really human rights work, environmental justice work. And there's an oil company that's been hounding me for years. I'm probably
understatement, Stephen.
Yes, I know. I'm probably the target of the most well-financed corporate retaliation campaign against a lawyer in the history of our country. Bottom line is, I don't have a bank account because the oil company Chevron took all my money as part of this legal battle I've been in. And I survived through a fund, a legal defense fund, that pays my legal fees and some household expenses of me and my family. I can't really work because if I were to work, they would just get the money. One of the things I'm doing out here is I'm meeting supporters and telling my story. And, I'm heavily reliant on the gods of the universe, really, of the generosity of people who hear what I'm going through and who step up to try to protect me. And I've been blessed, really. I mean, the crazy thing is I've been through a lot, and it's been a lot of pain, but there's also been a huge amount of blessings through this work because I've met tons of people. I mean, literally thousands of people around the world over the last 5 years have donated to my defense. Like small amounts, $10, $5, $20.
Lawyers are expensive.
Yeah. When you're a human rights lawyer, you don't really, you don't do it for the hourly fee, if you know what I'm saying. But yes, many lawyers are expensive. Chevron's lawyers are really expensive. Mm-hmm. I mean, Chevron's probably spent $3 billion on 60 law firms to try to fight us.
Which seems crazy because you won $10 billion.
Yes.
For Ecuador, for crimes against indigenous people,
right.
For a huge oil spill that just devastated the country. And so they've spent $3 billion to fight you?
They've admitted to like 1.5 to the Wall Street Journal, but it's really higher. Well, first of all, this is going on 30 years. I mean, we started this case way back in 1993 when I was a very young man. So it's been going on quite some time, but I think this is the most amount of money ever spent by a corporation on one case to beat back people who are trying to hold the corporation accountable for its abuse. And one of the, I'd say, innovative things about this case, and one of the unique things is it's the first time indigenous peoples, from the Amazon, who live in the most pristine place, the most pristine ecosystem really on the planet.
Probably places where human feet haven't even touched.
Exactly. Have taken an oil company to court and won a big judgment. We have the largest environmental judgment ever won in a court of law. And I think that has freaked out Chevron. It's freaked out the oil industry generally. And I think one reason they're so vicious about going after me is because I had a lot to do with that happening. I've been to Ecuador over 250 times, and I live in New York. When they looked at this whole thing and they're like, well, how can we kill this case, or how can we, avoid paying the people we poisoned down in Ecuador? They're like, let's go after Steven Donziger, because without him, this probably would have not have gone this far. I mean, by the way, there's a lot of other lawyers who worked on this case. I want to be clear about it. And I don't own this case. I'm just a lawyer on the case.
But you're the only one they came after?
They came after a bunch of people, but the others either gave up.
So they gave up their laptop or their phone, which is what essentially
they left the case.
Or they left the case.
They just flat out left.
Because that's what what happened, is that they then went after you after you won the $10 billion for them in the settlement, and you were supposed to produce your cell phone and your computer and your intellectual property, and you knew that you didn't have to, so you didn't.
Right. So basically what happened was we won, this epic case in 2013. They refused to pay the judgment out of the Ecuadorian court, where they insisted the trial be held and where they had accepted jurisdiction. So at that point, we're like, well, we're going after your money. So we filed lawsuits to enforce the Ecuador judgment in other countries where they had assets. They had taken all their assets out of Ecuador knowing they would lose the case.
Oh.
Okay. So we then went to Canada, where they have billions of dollars of assets, and we won a bunch of court decisions in Canada. And at that point, they decided they didn't want me to travel anymore, because I was in Canada, probably 15 times working with lawyers up there who were litigating on behalf of the Ecuadorian communities. So they concocted this excuse to get my computer. I'm telling you, they didn't really want my computer. They didn't care about my computer. They just wanted a reason to get me.
What if you produced it, though?
Well, they knew I couldn't produce it without completely violating my ethical duties to my clients.
And so there'd be another way in for them if you did that.
They put me in an impossible position where I had to choose between complying with basically an unconstitutional court order that no one's ever seen before. Like telling a lawyer to turn over his information, his confidential communications with his own clients to his adversary counsel. That doesn't happen.
You're not even allowed to talk about it, let alone turn over like evidence.
I mean, I can't explain how crazy this is.
Yeah,
okay?
That's why I tell everything to lawyers, because I'm like, I know you can't say anything.
Yeah, exactly, because there's confidentiality.
Exactly.
So I didn't just thumb my nose at the court. I basically told the judge who'd ordered me to do this, and I felt this whole thing was just a way to get me, but the judge was cooperating with the Chevron lawyers. This is in New York. We'd won the judgment in Ecuador, so they came to New York and sued me and got this case going. And by the way, they sued me for the most amount of money anyone's ever been sued for in U.S. history. I got sued for $60 billion.
Yeah.
60, not million, billion.
On what?
They accused me of civil racketeering. Their theory was the entire case in Ecuador, which has been affirmed unanimously by 6 different appellate courts, was a fraud. And the evidence they had was they had paid this witness in Ecuador to come up and claim that he was in a meeting where I approved the bribe of a trial judge, but it was just a complete lie. And this judge in New York—
People can be bought off all the time.
Exactly. The judge in New York denied me a jury, and it was a fix, basically. Because we kept going and we kept moving forward and making progress, I think they decided that they didn't want me working on this case anymore. And the way they got me locked up is they got the judge to issue this crazy order that I'd give them my information. I couldn't do it because it would have betrayed my clients. I was very honest with the judge. I can't do this, sir. I need to appeal this. I appealed this order to an appellate court. Mm-hmm. During the time I was appealing, my appeal was in, he charged me with criminal contempt of court for not giving my computer to Chevron, which would have destroyed the whole case. So at that point, he took the charge, this is where it really gets crazy, to the U.S. attorney in New York, the federal prosecutor appointed by the President of the United States. His name is Jeffrey Berman. And Mr. Berman looked at this case and refused to prosecute me. That should have been the end of it. Okay. The judge then appointed a private corporate law firm to step into the shoes of the U.S. government and prosecute me in the name of the government. But the craziest part is 6 months later, after this started, I found out that this private corporate law firm that was prosecuting me had Chevron as a client.
Of course they did.
Yeah. So I was prosecuted by Chevron, and the very lawyers that I had defeated got the right to lock me up, because basically they went into court on this petty misdemeanor, lowest level federal offense. I mean, there wasn't a crime, but they created this crime over the computer issue. And it was a misdemeanor. And they, on the basis of this misdemeanor, they had me locked up in my home with an ankle bracelet. This was in August of 2019, August 6th. I was shocked, by the way. I had gamed out worst case scenarios. And I never imagined that our legal system would allow this to happen.
You had to imagine that thing goes on your ankle, that this is coming off in a couple weeks.
That's
We're
exactly
going to figure this out,
crazy
right?
You say that because I'm like, I came home
What?
shocked from court. I thought they were just going to, I needed
Did
time
they
to
put
get
it
a lawyer.
on you at court? Like
Yes.
there, okay. And they're like, you have 1 hour to get home.
Yeah. So I went home. And my son, who at the time was like 14 or 15, was out doing something. And so I got home like at 1 o'clock with this ankle bracelet. And I'm like, how the hell am I going to explain this to my son? I'm like, well, it's probably not a big deal because I'll get it off in a week. A week became
993 days.
2 weeks, became a month. And I remember a month later, the United Nations General Assembly was in New York, and all these people come from all over the world. And everyone, I kind of have a lot of friends around the world because from my environmental justice work, like, oh, we want to come see you. What the hell happened? These kind of environmental leaders all came to my house, including at the time the head of Amnesty International, the Human Rights Group. And I remember this woman who I deeply respect saying to me, Stephen, when this gets to 100 days, let's do a big press event. Right? It was like 30 days in. And I was thinking to myself, like when I heard, I'm like, this is not going to be 100 days. This is going to be off in a week or two. But it dawned on me when she said that I think I was generating maybe some delusional optimism to psychologically survive. Because when I heard this third-party person I deeply respect say when it gets to 100 days as if it was going to happen, I'm like, holy fuck. Like, what happens if it does get to 100 days? And the crazy thing is it got to 100 days. And then it got to 200 and 300. And I would wake up every day. And I had this yellow legal pad. And I would make my list every day. I worked 7 days a week. Like, people think you're on house arrest, you have nothing to do. I was working my ass off to get my freedom back. And I'd make these lists. I had a lawyer. Why don't we file this motion? And then I'd call people up I knew and try to get people to put out statements and this and that. Finally, we went back to court in October. So it was August, September. So we were like 60 days in to ask the judge to remove my ankle bracelet. There was no basis for it. And it was like we were talking to, I don't know, like we were talking to like a wall.
Wow. You think maybe this could be like a flight risk situation?
Well,
maybe where they like flight risk. You can't go to Canada. You can't go to Ecuador.
But that's exactly.
But like house arrest is so ridiculously
and they had my
extreme.
passport. I couldn't leave the country anyway.
Well, that took care of that.
Exactly. So the way she looked at me and talked to me that day, I realized it's not about law, fairness. It is. There's something going on here. There's a persecution happening in the name of a prosecution. This judge is behind it. And she looked at me and she's like, no. And the way she said it, it was like, she's like, fuck you. Oh. And the reason that there was such vitriol, such animus, I mean, this was not normal, right? Was because these judges are really, these particular judges, I'm not saying the whole, not every judge, but these two particular judges who really made this happen are so pro-corporate, they're so pro-fossil fuel, that they were infuriated that a guy like me who comes from a world of relative privilege, I went to Harvard Law School in the same class as Barack Obama, FYI, would spend his career around oil pits in the jungle, helping people have no money, was like deeply offensive.
Are these judges part of the corporate capture that happened? Are
Yes.
they all paid off?
They're part of the corporate capture. A lot of it is just ideological solidarity with the corporate class. They're not necessarily paid.
They have to get something
but
from
they're
it.
Intellectually, well, I think they get prestige. Look at Clarence Thomas.
Favor of sorts.
He gets invited on these fancy vacations by corporate donors. I mean, there's lots of benefits to aligning yourself with those interests. And in this case, they just wanted to destroy me. And I actually think a lot of the lawyers who were on the Chevron legal team who were from this big New York law firm, Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, that knew a lot of the judges, and some judges came out of that law firm. Like, they were all friends. And I think they just were licking their chops. There's a lot of racism, too, in the sense that, like, they were like, Ecuador? What nerve does a country like Ecuador have to let its court system impose a multi-billion-dollar judgment on one of our companies? And the craziest shit, even though this case has been affirmed by 6 appellate courts, this one trial judge in New York who orchestrated this whole thing against me issued a ruling where he purported to look at the Ecuador trial, and he found, based on nothing other than his own feelings, because he doesn't speak Spanish, never read the trial court transcript, which is 220,000 pages, doesn't know crap about Ecuadorian law, but his guy ruled that the case was illegitimate. He essentially, from his New York trial court, tried to overturn a final decision of the highest court of a sovereign nation, Ecuador. And the arrogance. And it's only like, oh, that's Ecuador, But they wanted the case in Ecuador. And by the way, Ecuador has a fine judicial system. There was a lot going on here that...
What are they protecting? Because as I'm listening to this, you won $10 billion. They've spent maybe $3 billion fighting it. Mm-hmm. Who was it that had the huge oil spill in the Gulf 20 or some years ago? BP?
Yeah.
Look, that happened, right? I'm sure they had to pay things.
Right.
It's not like people don't go to BP gas stations to get gas because, you know what I mean? So what are they protecting?
So I would say the answer...
Because it's obviously not about money, since they've already spent a third of it, essentially.
That's a great question.
To fight you.
But I think the answer is they're protecting a business model that is used to going to far off, geographically isolated countries that have a lot of oil and getting the oil out of the ground and dumping the waste onto the ground and then, sort of offloading it to these vulnerable communities. And that whole business model, which is really a public subsidy of the oil industry, if you think about it. Because, in Ecuador, and this has happened in California, it's happened in the United States, like, they drill, they get the oil out, they take it to a refinery, and then they take it to market, and they sell it for a lot of money.
Yeah.
But the whole process from beginning to end creates pollution. So what happens to the pollution? They don't want to pay for the cleanup of the pollution. So if they can get away with it, they'll just leave it out there. I mean, in Ecuador, they're just off, it's like privatization of profits, and they want to socialize the costs onto these vulnerable communities in the rainforest, these indigenous peoples. And it's just awful, and it's really unfair. And I think that even though the amount of money at stake in this case, while not insignificant, it doesn't materially affect Chevron's bottom line. So why do they fight it so hard? And the reason is they're really worried if these indigenous groups get this money at this level, other communities around the world will be inspired. They'll get the same idea. The floodgates will open. Oh my God.
You're the 4-minute mile for this.
That's exactly right. That's the perfect way to put it. But I mean, you were the first, race car driver who was a female to operate at the level that you did. So, I can't imagine the resistance you probably hit through various quarters.
I was never put on house arrest or had my bank accounts frozen. In fact, they filled my bank accounts. They cheered for me. Big difference. You have a lot rougher than I do. So,
but the point is, when you are the first one out of the gate, even if it's a good thing, is what happened.
It's still challenging.
There is resistance. And I think this is the first such case. And I tell people, I think this is really true. Like, they not only want to win this case, they want to kill off the idea you can do a case like this. They want to kill the case, the idea of the case.
Well, you say kill. And I mean, in all of this, I think about, we spoke for just a minute before we started and hearing about just how busy you kept. But part of the busy was doing interviews and talking about it. And, I wonder how you feel. And I don't know if this was your mission or became more apparent to you, or maybe it became part of it. But do you think that speaking publicly and putting your face out there and putting a face to the story has potentially saved your life? Because we know within our government system that there's probably things that go on that would shock us. And I think they include getting rid of people like you or others that are interfering with the system that they want to exist in the way that it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things about being in this position is, like, you never really know what's going on behind the curtain. Like, you're sort of, well, they could be doing this. And when they put me in prison, I'm like, I couldn't really share this with anyone other than maybe one or two very close friends. I did not share this with my family, but I had a fear that if they were able to get me into prison, I might not ever be free again. I might not get out. I could either be killed in prison, because I mean, people die in prison all the time, or they could just make up a crime, like if she assaulted a guard, charge you with a felony, and like, I'll just be in for 10 years. So I was fighting really hard not to go to prison, because I felt like once I crossed that line, I would be much more vulnerable.
So
Ultimately,
scary.
and I was worried Chevron and these judges could control what happened to me in prison through their networks. So
Probably
I did.
could.
They probably could. So I really decided, once I went back to court after 60 days and the judge looked at me like I was crazy just to ask for the ankle bracelet off, I'm like, you know what? You better start getting your story out there, because the only protection
The
you're
judge
gonna
said
have-
that?
No, I said that to myself. I said, the only protection you're going to have is solidarity and getting your story out, making it so visible that they can't do anything to you, because you protect
Gladiator. This is winning the people.
That is exactly right. So,
and as a human rights lawyer, you're barking up the right tree.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
And so I started to literally, I said, you're going to talk to whoever asks you to talk. And I was like, I talked to, elementary school classes. This is during COVID also, by the way. So everyone was getting really used to Zoom. I talked to kids in school. I talked to law students, church groups, synagogues. I mean, I talked to whoever wanted me to talk. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was in my house. I'd get on Zoom. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, like, a lot of these networks, like 100 people or hundreds of people were showing up on these Zoom calls to hear my story. And then suddenly I'm on, like, Crystal Ball's podcast and Michael Moore's podcast and Ralph Nader's podcast. And I'm like, the story is rising. Now, in the meantime, the corporate media is completely ignoring the story. Like, the fact is, an American human rights lawyer is locked up for political reasons in the United States of America. If that was in Russia, they'll cover it. If it's in, Myanmar, they'll cover it. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, they cover it. Okay. Here I am, literally a 20-minute walk from the New York Times news headquarters, their newsroom, from my apartment, where I am locked up, and they would not come cover that story. And I'm reading that paper, like, every other week there's a story about some lawyer being locked up in another country, and you might be a little more politically ahead of me, because, like, I actually believed in the New York Times for many years, read it every day. And I started to realize, no, like, it doesn't work that way. So I made a pledge that I was going to use every possible media space I could. Like, this is an example, us sitting down together. Podcasts, independent journalists, mm-hmm. classrooms, mm-hmm. networks. Mm-hmm. And over about a year after I realized I needed to do that, because my first lawyer was like, don't talk. The judge will be mad at you. I mean, like, the traditional, like, lawyer advice.
Walk the line. This is the box you fit in.
And after she wouldn't let me get that ankle bracelet off, even he goes, he looked like he was about to pass out, this lawyer. Huh. He's a good lawyer. But he said he'd never seen anything like this before. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I really started to talk. And over time, I got a bunch of Nobel laureates signed a letter on my behalf. There's an organization called the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. It's the largest legal organization in the world. It has 600,000 members around the world, lawyers. They started backing me. Then they wrote a misconduct complaint against my judge that got a lot of attention. And little by little, I was able to push against what they were doing to me and expose it. And the more it got exposed, like, I noticed they would duck out. They're cowards, basically. Mm-hmm. They go after you when they feel they can get away with it. But once they're exposed, they back off because they start to look bad. In any event.
Well, it gets a lot worse then, is the problem for them.
Yeah, it gets a lot worse.
Right?
And then they start to look bad and the tables turn.
Exactly.
So, there was like a little bit of a dance going on, and ultimately the judge was really determined that I go to prison. I mean, I can't even get into the crap she did to, like, make me go to prison. There's never been a lawyer other than me in the history of this country who's ever spent a minute in prison for this level of offense. And I spent, 993 days total, 45 in a federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut. The judge sentenced me. The max sentence I could get for my supposed crime was 6 months in prison. Mm. This judge denied me a jury, wouldn't let me defend myself, and summarily sentenced me to 6 months in prison after I had already spent 2 years and 2 months on house arrest, essentially detained in my house. So, like, I raised my hand, and I'm like, wait a second, okay? how can you sentence me when I've already spent over 4 times the max sentence locked up? And the response was, well, you weren't really detained at home. You were free with a condition of release. She called it a condition of release, which is that you stay at home with an ankle bracelet, but you weren't detained. So there's all this sort of Kafkaesque doublespeak going on.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Where they just make up language.
I mean, it's a planned release for your term in prison, too.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Does that not count?
Yeah. So it was really creepy. And it, look, I went to Harvard Law School. Okay. I wanted to be a lawyer to help people. I love the law, Like, I love the law. Like, I like the promise of the law. I like using
Why? I'm very curious about this. I'm a bit of a rebel myself. I look at rules and I'm like, what makes sense and what doesn't? And I'll follow the ones that make sense, but the ones that don't, I am a dickhead rebel. What is it about the law that you find to be intriguing, the most important and valuable for us?
Okay, what I'd say is this. First of all, I'm a rebel too. And just because a law exists doesn't mean it's right. I challenge laws all the time. Try to create new laws that are more just. So I'm the same way. But, we live in a complex world, right? And we live in a sophisticated country, a complex economy. And I figured out early on that if you don't really dig in to understand all the rules and the laws and how they get manipulated to favor certain interests over others, how, they sometimes they have a certain promise that doesn't come true because they're being undermined by powerful interests. Mm-hmm. And other times they can be used to really help people, like when you can fulfill that promise. It's a total mixed bag. So when I say I love the law, it doesn't mean I love the legal system.
Okay.
It simply means I find knowing the law to the extent that I do a way to really understand the larger issues in our society and sort of how to solve problems and how to mobilize people. Like when I went to Ecuador, my first trip back in probably before you were born, it was 1993.
No, very sweet of you. I was born in 82.
Okay, so you were a kid and I was a young lawyer.
I was a young race car driver. I started when I was 10, so we were both embarking on our careers.
Exactly. I met indigenous peoples who were living in fucking oil garbage in the rainforest. And to be able to explain to them what the law is and what we could do as lawyers to try to help them, to take their legal claims to court in a way that Texaco did this. Chevron then bought Texaco, but in the way that Texaco and Chevron, I'm sure never could have imagined these people with no money would ever find lawyers, would ever find competent lawyers, would ever find lawyers who could raise capital to finance this kind of case, which we've done over the years. They never imagined this would ever happen. So to be able to have that conversation with people as opposed to oh my God, I wish I could help you. I'll raise money at my church bake sale and try to get you some money to get health care versus, oh no, we're going after them where it hurts and we're going to get billions of dollars from them. Okay, we're going to make them disgorge their profits that they took out of your land that ended up destroying you. Okay, we're going to go get that money. And you're going to hire us. I mean, whatever. You're going to hire us. You can hire us if you want, and we can make this happen. And they're like, hell yeah. Being a lawyer enabled me to have a different kind of discussion about a solution that was empowering to them and empowering to those of us who were doing it.
Yeah.
And that began, this is back in 1993, but that began like a relationship between, a bunch of people, me among them, who live relatively privileged lives in the United States of America, comfortable lives, and people who were really the frontline defenders of the planet, indigenous peoples, but who had no money. Mm-hmm. By the way, just because they had no money doesn't mean they weren't wealthy. They lived in the forest. They were wealthy without money in ways that most Americans could never comprehend.
Had a form of collateral underneath their feet.
Yeah, I mean, they have food and they have clean air and clean water and they have shelter and they half of them lived 100 years or more. And the word cancer, by the way, wasn't even in their native languages when I got there.
Well, that says something, doesn't it?
I mean,
given we're using
when I got there, it was. I'm sorry. When Texaco got there in the 1960s, there was no cancer.
I mean, so many of the things that kill us that we're becoming aware of are byproducts of oil.
Of oil and chemicals and so it was profound. And I can say that even though I'm now in my early 60s and I have no bank account, I'm just
It's frozen. It's just frozen. It's empty and frozen.
It's empty and frozen.
Because if anything goes in, you said they get it.
They could get it.
They could
if
get
they
it.
wanted it, because I owe them millions of dollars because the judge ordered me to repay them for the legal fees for putting me in jail. I am become them in a bizarre way. Let me explain what I mean by
Become
that.
them?
My clients. So when I first met them, they had no money. We had the resources. And over the 30 years that I've been doing this, I've become a person also without those types of resources, meaning the monetary resources.
Wow.
But I have so many other resources like they do, like their natural world. And my resources are solidarity and my ability to have a platform and all the relationships I've been able to create and enjoy through this work. Even relationships I made in prison with other inmates, the stuff I learned in prison. And I've had this really rich journey, even though I have no bank account. And like, it dawned on me, I'm writing a book right now. So like, I'm really thinking about a lot of these issues. And it just dawned on me like, wow, what a journey. Like at the beginning, I thought they had no money. We're going to get them money and everyone's going to.
You felt bad for them?
You know what I'm saying?
You know, wanted to help.
Yeah.
Here you are.
And here I am also like them.
Yeah.
But we're all rising and wealthy in a certain sense. And ultimately, I believe that Chevron will be forced to pay every penny of this judgment to them.
Well, I sure hope that's the case, as I think justice is also very important. But when it comes to the law, a couple of things is, you know, one silly example I go to when it comes to rules is being a rule breaker, but I go to this crazy event called Burning Man every year. And every meeting, this will be my third year. What's ironic about it is people think that there's no rules and that it's just absolute anarchy, chaos, craziness. And there's an element of that to it. But there are 10 rules and you must abide by them or you could be caught by the rangers. The camp won't invite you back. It's just not welcome if you don't follow these 10 rules. So it's in fact the adherence so closely to these 10 rules that create freedom.
Yeah.
And that also one of the things that I love is truth and understanding the nature of reality and how everything works. And I want to know that because when I know the rules and how it works, I know how to play the game.
Yeah. Well, I can relate because like one of the things that drew me into law school was precisely that. Like I really wanted to understand how this game is played in this country. And, you know, and I love being a lawyer. By the way, I'm no longer a lawyer technically because they disbarred me without a hearing, which is a whole other thing. But like they haven't stolen my knowledge of the law.
Right.
And they haven't stolen my skill as a lawyer. And I still use it as an advocate. I wanted to understand how it all works. Because like, you know, because I found like if you can't sort of understand how the sausage is made and how the elites do their thing, it's very hard to sort of meaningfully change things at any fundamental level. You know? Well,
the real question, really it was the first question that I wanted to ask you was, who runs this country or the planet?
Yeah.
I mean, and there's such a movement too with globalists on the planet trying to create essentially a one society of the planet. I mean, who's really running this country or this planet?
Well, that's a big question.
It is. And if you had the answer, I'm sure.
Exactly. I don't purport to have the answer. This is my take on that question.
Yeah. I mean, you're behind the curtain. Yeah. You're in it now. You knew a lot already, but now you see it from a completely different perspective that I'm sure is like putting a puzzle together.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to venture a couple of possibilities. Don't purport to really know the answer, but this is the thing. In the United States, one thing that's become really clear to me is that our two-party political system is really not working. It doesn't meet the needs of the people, the majority of the people. It's very much beholden to moneyed interests. And I think in this country, more and more, I've seen over my course of my legal career, much more than, say, the 80s and 90s, is the power of the corporate sector over our government and over our society is increasing. It's really at alarming levels. And like the control of the Supreme Court by sort of the corporate right in this country now is really limiting our freedom. I mean, what bothers me most about this country right now is we have basically 6 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court who are not elected by anybody, who are making decisions that are really limiting the freedom of 330 million people. 6 people have that power. And this was not just an accident. This was part of a planned out strategy that's gone on since the early 80s. It's been outlined in books, which I can recommend to people, by right-wing corporate interests, many in the fossil fuel industry, but also other industries, the Koch brothers funding that work. And this has been a strategic plan to essentially control our society through the one unelected branch at the highest level through 6 people. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, or maybe I am. I
am, so feel free.
Yeah.
A lot of my viewers also like that too. So.
Exactly. Well,
because at the end of the day, it sounds like such a negative, like as if it's just crazy talk, but it's not anymore.
But it's true.
Crazy. A conspiracy theorist was invented by the CIA anyway as propaganda to dismiss new ideas.
Totally.
So it's already we know it's bullshit.
And there are conspiracies.
Yeah, there are those too.
So to be a conspiracy theorist about stuff that there's data to back it up, there's nothing wrong with that. Right. It should happen. But I'll say that if I could recommend to your listeners a book to really understand this at a deep level. Mm-hmm. And ironically, it's written by a U.S. senator he's a lawyer, Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island. He used to be the Attorney General of Rhode Island. He wrote a book called The Scheme. It's gotten very little attention. I read it cover to cover. It came out like 2 years ago. Oh, wow. And it explains how they did this, how they took over our judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, to carry out the most extreme right-wing agenda on women's reproductive freedom, on the ability of government to regulate industry has been completely destroyed by this recent Chevron case. And now they issued a ruling essentially giving the president immunity from criminal charges. I mean, it's very, very interesting. Unfortunately, most people think, well, judges are fair. I mean, we've been conditioned to believe our judiciary is fair.
That's the narrative. That's the narrative.
It's a narrative. And that sort of hit me hard because when this very biased judge in favor of Chevron started to make these rulings against me, even though all these appellate courts have ruled in my favor, people are like, oh, if the judge says this, it must be true. And, what had been a competition and narrative between like our team and Chevron's team, they say this, we say that. People are like, oh, I wonder, people really believed us over the oil company. Once this judge weighed in, I noticed that people were like believing the judge because he's a judge, over me. I mean, which is sort of disturbing in a lot of ways, but understandable. So, it works at a lot of levels. But getting back to your question, I think this country, our system has been taken over at every level of every branch of government by the influence of extremely moneyed interests. And I think that hurts the people. And I think internationally, similar things are happening in other countries.
Well, I mean, the one that comes to mind is at least top of mind is BlackRock and how Larry Fink and BlackRock, they have under their company, 40 trillion under management, which is that a third of the US GDP or something like that? It's like an insane amount of they're operating. And, even then when we look at like human rights, I mean, one of the things that I've heard is things like they're going in and they're buying homes so that everyone gets to the point where they're going to rent from now on.
I know.
And so there's just, these all lead into human rights of what should we be able to do? What should we know? Who's running the show? Mm-hmm. What do we have the power to do? And look, if there's one thing, going back to Gladiator, that really works is that we, the people, it is our cooperation that many times can perpetuate these things or stop them.
Right.
I'm sure that if we didn't want networks to exist anymore because we thought CNN and Fox, and if you stop watching, they go away. It seems like there's so much corruption that it's hard to know what's real anymore.
I think that's true. And I'll also say, you raise an interesting issue. Like, we have a lot of power. Okay, let me just say this. People say, well, what can we do? Think about this. We have the numbers. Like, there are so many more people who are bothered by the system than who support this system, in my opinion. I mean, people are really frustrated. Talking about in our country. There's millions, tens of millions of people who, if they had some organizing vehicle to deal with this, they would, in my opinion, sign up. but there's all sorts of
What's that? What would be an organization?
It could be like a labor political party. It could be a general strike with demands like you see in European countries. It could be a campaign, an independent political campaign like Bobby Kennedy's. I mean, it could be lots of things. But every time these things get created, they get ignored by the media. And
because they're owned by,
because
you say there's 6 judges, but there's like 6 companies that own the world too.
Yeah, very true. So it's very hard.
666. Let's find another 6.
It's very hard to organize in a society where the levers of power prevent people from learning about what you're doing. But we do have the numbers, and I do think it is possible if we unite, around these core issues that we're talking about on the show and some other things to really deal with this. But the power on the other side is extraordinary. I mean, as an example, and I don't support Donald Trump at all. I actually don't like the guy at all, but I will say this. When he talks about pulling out of NATO, in Ukraine, that completely threatens the economic interests of a huge sector of our economy, like the war machine, the companies that make weapons,
the most profitable business.
Yeah, and they see him as a major threat, in my opinion, because of his politics. There's certain people who get to that level to really threaten some core things that are happening, as you pointed out earlier in our discussion, who become threats, and like weird shit begins to happen. I think that the Ecuador case that I was a part of, it rose to a level that really threatened the business model of the industry.
Mm-hmm. I can see how.
In other words, if we had won a $100 million judgment, we could work it out. Like, they can deal with
Make that go away.
Yeah. They can deal with that. Like, they'll pay, maybe.
Well, 10 billion becomes 20 billion, becomes
but
30
also
billion, becomes...
and it's the symbol,
right?
Because these companies have literally trillions of dollars of environmental liability around the world because they don't clean up the crap they're dumping. And this has gone on for 100 years. They never pay. So the idea that these indigenous peoples could get this amount of money would basically threaten their entire business model. And it rose to that level, which is why I think they went after me to the extent that they did.
Well, I think about as being the people, being the power, and then, how censorship has become so well known by us that we are. I mean, I've had it happen to me. You mentioned Bobby. If I post anything tagging Bobby, it's reduced by half, and it's viewers, the views on social, whether it's likes or story views or anything like that, the engagement goes down by half. And it seems like they almost put a hold on it for a while too. And then there are things that were taken down. Let's say you see the stuff that gets put out there through crazy raunchy music videos.
Oh yeah.
Ass and titties everywhere, and words that are so outlandish, the things that they can say. And then I have a photo that has my sister's little kids, and we're playing in a creek, and one of them's 2 years old and she's naked.
Yeah.
And they take it down.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech is being able to say what you want without punishment.
Right.
And there's punishment on some level, even if it's not financial or physical. But just your ability as a U.S. citizen to be able to use these platforms and places to say whatever you want. I mean, then I think about Elon Musk, and I'm curious what your opinion is on him, because him taking over and taking Twitter and making it X, and trying to make this a platform where people can say what they want. I mean, how much of an issue is just freedom of speech and the censorship that's happening? I
mean, I feel it every day. I bump up against these restrictions in my own posts, my inability to grow. Elon has his own algorithm that also limits people's ability to grow, while he's unleashed other people who had been limited by the prior owners of Twitter. I mean, everyone's got their way to, kind of put the lid on speech that doesn't comport with, I think, what they believe. I'm not, in terms of Elon, the jury's kind of out and where this all goes. I do admire his gumption and sort of taking it on, but it's complicated. And a guy like me, who's a human rights guy, and I'm a progressive guy who fights for the underdog. And I also like to call out human rights violators, one of which right now, in my opinion, is the state of Israel, what they're doing to the Palestinians in Gaza, And I started posting a bit about that. I'm Jewish, by the way, and I always kind of stayed away from that issue. And it just really bothers me on a lot of levels, the level of killing that's taking place in Gaza right now. And when I started posting about that, I noticed that I just, boom, I couldn't grow. And I do get a fair amount of engagement, on those posts, given the size of my following. But like, I just stopped growing.
I think you need some nudes,
Exactly.
Stuff like that. Some Cardi B flavor,
Yeah.
That might increase your engagement.
Like maybe change my hair.
Swimsuit photos always work for me.
Yeah. Lawyers who party, something like that. But no, it's like, these are serious issues. And like you see with Bobby's campaign.
Oh my God.
He can't get coverage.
I just feel like he doesn't have a chance.
Yeah. I mean,
he's not even in the conversation.
They won't let him on the debate stage. They won't let people be exposed to him. They won't cover his ideas. They cover like weird stuff, like, parasite on the brain. I mean, whatever that story was, like they give that massive coverage, but like his very interesting policy proposals, they won't cover because they want to act like the only choice is between a Democrat and a Republican. That to me is
there's such a huge problem with the polarization of where we need to go. Because let's face it, very few are on the far right or far left. Right. That's actually that's the minority. The majority is in the middle.
Yeah,
like we're all pretty much overlapping at some point in the middle, right? And ultimately, we all end up wanting the same thing in life anyway.
Yeah, right.
So, do you think there's a solution within our government and political system to put people in power that are making good decisions so that we can actually uphold democracy? Because it sure seems like there's not much left of it.
Yeah, I think that's the aspiration. But no, I mean, like,
no solution?
Well, no, I'm saying.
We start our own commune.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been talking about this for about 6 years now.
Yeah, exactly.
So we might need a lawyer in this commune.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. But yeah, I mean,
put us over some oil. Okay?
Exactly. Yeah, some oil pits. It's really distressing to see the extent to which, like, campaign contributions from moneyed interests control who can be an elected official.
I don't know how any politician really gets to the top without being bought off.
No,
halfway up.
I think you can't get to the top. I mean, there's like a handful of people in the Congress who really speak out, but they're like in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in like a particular district where like a lot of people are very progressive, but like most districts, people who really are independent can't get elected. And if you happen to get elected and you don't toe the line, they then spend money to get rid of you.
Oh, 100%. I interviewed Tulsi a few months back, Tulsi Gabbard, and she said that you'd get a piece of paper with how you're going to vote that day. That's it. This is you're a Democrat. This is how you vote.
Like the Democratic Party.
Exactly. They'd say, look, these are the bills that are up. These are what we're going to vote on, and this is how you're going to vote. It's like, wait a minute. There's no autonomy on that, nor is there any understanding as to why we're doing that.
Right.
But I'm betting it's follow the money.
Yeah, they expect you to just fall in line.
Exactly.
So, when you ask for solutions, I mean, I feel a little bit, I'm an optimist, and I do believe we have the numbers, and I do believe people can unite around a clear plan. We can really make a lot of progress. We're sort of moving away from the freedom model and moving toward the corporate control model in our country. Mm-hmm. And it's really irritating and troubling. Like when you start locking up a human rights lawyer, which is what happened to me in this country. By the way, there's been 1,700 environmental activists who've been assassinated or murdered in the last 10 years, according to Global Witness, around the world, not in the United States. But when they start taking like a guy like me and locking him up, that's creeping into our country. Okay. It's happening. Yeah. Okay. And there are a lot of people like in the climate justice movement, fighting for climate justice, fighting to sort of deal with the heat waves and all the climate crisis that's happening, who are being locked up at extraordinary levels right now in the United States. And I know a lot of them. I mean, they come to me because I'm sort of become this person who I try to keep track of all this stuff. And
you're like a general consultant now.
Yeah, exactly. But it's troubling. And of course, there's no stories about it. I mean, there's no general stories about this trend, about how many people are locked up in the United States because of politics. But it happens. It really does.
Along the lines of human rights and who has the rights. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what your thoughts are about things going on in this country where rights are being moved to the youth and the underage to be able to make decisions on their gender.
Mm-hmm.
As a human rights lawyer, that is essentially still a right of a human. But what are your thoughts on the shift in power between states having states be individualized to be able to make their own decisions and have their own rules versus also then how that is shifting from adults to children? Is this also another really dangerous area that we're getting into?
It's funny. I mean, I haven't given that a ton of thought, but I have given it some thought. And my feeling is, for example, the whole transgender thing, look, you want to respect people's autonomy and their choices about their bodies and about their sexual freedom and about what they want to do, with their, how they want to live, their identities. Mm-hmm. I'm really bothered by the idea that like people under the age of 18 could make these choices.
Your prefrontal cortex isn't even fully formed until you're 25.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
You can't date under 25.
But I'll tell you something. I think that, if you're a consenting adult, you can do what you want. But like the idea that kids can, to be cool or for whatever reason can start to go down that path, I find troubling.
Is there a secret agenda there, do you think? Do you think that there's anything more nefarious going on that they'd be trying to completely dismantle the family system or fundamental questions that seem like they have biologically normal, like predictable answers, like what is a male and what is a female?
Yeah. I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I think there's a lot of cross currents going on in our society. And some things have sort of shifted and gone off the rails, in the name of like human rights or helping people achieve autonomy, their identities. I think generally there's way too much focus on like individual identities and like groups and stuff. I mean, I think
identity politics wrecking
and like, Joe Biden would go out and campaigns on like, he went to the NAACP. I just couldn't believe he says, you should vote for me because I appointed the first black woman to the Supreme Court. I mean, what are you saying that for? He should say, this is what I've done for all of America. Mm-hmm. How I've tried to increase the standard of living for working Americans. I've tried to create, a more human Supreme Court. I appointed X person. Like to sort of go right into the racial identity politics.
It's a reason.
It's patronizing. And ineffective also, and in my opinion.
Yeah. I've always believed that the more you talk, the more you speak to and give words to and a platform to the ideas that are making you different, the more different you are. You're literally reinforcing them.
Yeah, I think that's true. So when you were doing the race car thing, you were basically,
they asked me all the time to do things that were female oriented, like take a picture with all these girls, do this for the girl, have a girl team, do that, think about this. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, I'm going to do it how I want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it as a driver. What human rights are the most important to you that you think that are in such jeopardy right now? If you were back in your position as a lawyer and they gave you your degree back and your ability to practice law, your law license, I think where would you start? Like, what would be your hit list of the topics and the issues that are so close to us losing?
You start with the fundamental, most important stuff, which is the right to life, the right to be free, right to liberty. And,
what does that mean?
Well, let's think about it.
Yeah.
Historically, it's been defined in this country as just the government keeps out of your stuff. But I actually think it's more than that. I think it's the right to have a society, to live in a society where there's at least a minimal standard of living. Like, I don't think people should be out on the street unhoused, or children should go to bed hungry at night in this country. We have too much wealth for that, but it happens. Millions of children are hungry in this country every night. We have a hunger problem. While other people have massive excess, and half the country's walking around obese because they're eating processed foods, So I think human rights encompasses the right to, to be free, to live, but also the right to have some sort of minimal standard of living. Like, I think we have to get in that mindset. We really do. And if you go to Europe, I'm sure you've been to Europe many times, Scandinavian countries, I mean, you don't see people on the street to the extent that you do here. You just don't. And everyone, there's healthcare system where everyone has a right to participate and get basic healthcare. Canada has this. Every industrialized country has this but ours. So you have tens of millions of people who can't access basic healthcare and live with the stress every day that some sort of catastrophic illness could bankrupt them. So I think human rights needs to encompass some sort of, right to a minimal standard of safety and living, life,
So let me just get into that for a second. So then, I agree. I think we are all humans, yet we don't all operate the same. So I look at it from a standpoint of what makes you happy is a good question. But if there wasn't a lot of as much incentive to get ahead, honestly, one of the things that makes you happy is achieving.
Yeah.
It's like doing something great. It's making more money for some people to be able to afford new things or just have the pure accomplishment. So where does that subsidization come to be able to give everyone somewhere to be and somewhere to live, that would maybe, I'm thinking, come from those who are working to get ahead? So that others maybe don't have to, or live a life that isn't quite as ambitious or productive or inspired or even positive or healthy.
I think you want to maintain incentives for people to work and to, get ahead.
Do you think the rich should be highly taxed?
I think we have to have higher taxes in this country for the wealthy than we do. We have the lowest tax rate. Jeff Bezos pays 1% of his income in taxes.
It's all the loopholes, you know.
Exactly.
It's you get it. Like when you know how to play the game, you know the rules. You know how to play the game.
Totally.
Trump's done this too. He's
Michael
gone,
Bloomberg,
look. The reason why he's so wealthy too. Like there are systems in place that keep these people wealthy, but they also employ a ton of people, and there's other sides to it. I'm no expert by any means, but I'm a person that has a lot of wealth and success, and I worked my ass off for it. And I see there's other people that I think that you would just want to be able to have show some ambition. And I'm being really general here,
I know,
but I'm just looking at it from a practicality standpoint of like how this would actually work.
That dynamic is fair. But what I'm really talking about is when someone's born, and it's the lottery of birth, like, whether you're born into resources or you're born into total poverty, like every kid should have access to healthcare and a minimal standard of living so they can do exactly what you're talking about, have those opportunities. And, poverty is self-perpetuating, wealth is self-perpetuating. I think what we need is to take everyone and treat them in a way from birth where they can really have a good education, have food, have healthcare, and have these opportunities you're talking about. Now, when they become adults, if they choose to sit on the couch, that's their thing. I'm not saying subsidize those people, okay? But, there's a lot of billionaires in Canada, and they've had a whole national healthcare system for decades and decades. I mean, people still have ambition, and they can still become extremely wealthy, even with a slightly higher tax rate that can be used to give these children opportunities. So I hear you, and I'm not really disagreeing with you, but I think it's find the right balance.
I mean, in my heart, that's the right thing. It's the question is there even structure in place that it actually gets funneled into that direction or not?
Well, I mean,
or does it just get funneled to Ukraine? You know what I mean? Right? I mean, this is the thing that pisses people off.
Oh, yeah. So we send, say, $100 billion of military aid to Ukraine, and we cannot prevent millions of children in America from going hungry at night. Okay, that's not right. That's not right. And, now who benefits from the assistance to Ukraine? Who benefits from conflict, global conflict, war? As you say, follow the money. There's certain companies in the world and in the United States that make so much profit whenever there's a war. And if you've noticed, we sort of live in a state of permanent war.
And if there isn't one, they create one.
That's
the war on terror, the war on cancer, the war on... we love war.
Yeah, we love war. And, it doesn't have to be that way. So I would say the other thing I would suggest, I mean, your listeners do this, I'm sure, because they're listening to you, but like people need to understand how to think critically
100%
about issues and also get information.
Be a fact finder.
Yeah. Well, your podcast is an example. I mean, there are a lot of podcasts out there of thoughtful people who are putting out information and talking to people that are completely ignored by the mainstream media. Like I can't get into the New York Times, okay, but I can talk to you, and I can talk to Ralph Nader and others and get my word out in at least certain parts of the audience. That's an important shift in our society in the last 20 years. It's empowered me. I mean, I was living in the New York Times fog like my whole life until I realized there was other sources of information. By the way, I still read the New York Times every day because I like to know how they go about it and how they think. Some
of the smartest people always say you gotta see both sides.
Exactly.
You gotta look at both sides. You gotta get a full understanding, as well as keep yourself in check. You know, because it's you can let the algorithms of the world populate your mind and timelines so that you would never even see anything else, and that's also not healthy either because there's control in that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you have done a good job sort of going through a process of what I would call decolonizing your head of bullshit information. And would you agree? It takes a lot of energy. Like when I wake up every day, you look at social media, you got to try to get information sources and get information about current stuff that's like helpful as opposed to harmful.
Well, this is a little bit more woo-woo, but I didn't watch the news from like 2018 until this year.
Really?
And
you never watched TV news?
At all. Didn't pay attention. There are still some things that I don't. I am more engaged and feel a little bit more of a calling to it from an empowered place, not from like it feels like a positive place, yet it is still drama and it is still somewhat negativity. I think that, so the woo-woo part is, I think we all need to remember that we have this special thing called intuition.
Yeah.
And our body's still giving us information about what's right and wrong. And so even if we just use you as an example, it's like, does this feel right that was done to you when you were trying to bring justice to a country that was demolished by oil and a company that just was using their size and power and influence to take advantage of those who couldn't take care of themselves? This seems so wrong. This seems so unfair, right? The intuition would just tell you like, oh, wow, the oil company is just trying to get rid of you.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think we gotta get into a practice of doing a little bit more of that. And I think, I err on a little bit of the spiritual side at times, but I think that we all have a bit of a superpower that we don't really tap into as much because, and it's too hard to because there's so much noise. So I think part of the decluttering, it comes through not being cluttered with so much, right?
I think that's right.
And auditing what does come in and making sure that whatever it is positive, it's uplifting you, it's opening your mind, it's expanding it. It's not necessarily just allowing you to spiral in a bunch of different identity politics buckets to go, this is why I don't have what I want.
Did you, when you did your hiatus from watching TV news, did you feel healthier? Did you feel better? How did you feel? Because I bet you've this has maybe crossed your mind at times too, because you're like, it's all bullshit. Yeah, right. I remember at the very beginning, I was like, man, I normally would just watch the news in the morning. When I was at some points at CNN, if it's early enough in the morning that morning news isn't on yet, but then it'd be like, Good Morning America, Today Show, those kinds of things. I remember, what am I going to do? Oh man, I'm so used to turning this on. And it's almost like a ritual of sorts. Yeah. It has it's almost like football on a Sunday, right? It just kind of feels like Sunday. Yeah. I was like, man, what am I going to do? So that's actually when I started shifting to a completely opposite side of things, which felt opposite to me, where I started watching more information about spirituality, about the way the body works, the way the universe works, and positive messaging. So I felt like I was expanding my mind instead of contracting it into a narrow lane. I get it. And, it's funny because I was just in Hawaii for a month. I'm working on my book, and this friend of mine, let me stay in his guest house, and there's no TV. And every day I'd wake up, I'd write, I'd go to this yoga class, jump in the ocean, write. And I felt so good. It was crazy. and I barely posted too. I generally post a fair amount about human rights issues. And it just felt like really cleansing to me to sort of live that way. And I do spend a lot of time, and it is somewhat ritualistic. Like when I get up, I want to see what's going on, like what the establishment is thinking. So I'll turn on CNN and Morning Joe, or even Fox. I watch a lot of Fox. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and watch both sides, right?
Yeah. So, but then you get sucked in and you spend an hour doing that. And then you start thinking about all the things you just heard. And what do you do? What am I going to post? And it's a lot of energy. It's a lot of energy. And, I hear you. And I think, sort of severing from like what they're throwing at us, because like they love this presidential campaign because like everyone wants to tune in and they make more money. I'm done with the cable news networks, and they're always hyping it up, and, they're not really talking about the real issues, and they're ignoring Bobby Kennedy, and they're ignoring Marianne Williamson, and they're ignoring Cornel West and the other candidates. And, you have to be really careful not to get too sucked into that.
We're in Hawaii, one of the things, again, we were briefly talking before about your family, your wife and your son. Are they able to join you on these journeys? And then also just what's the effect been on them with everything that's gone on with you? What's the toll that it's taken on them? And perhaps what are some of the gems? What coal turned into diamonds?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So Chevron first sued me for $60 billion, the most amount of money anyone's ever been sued for in the history of our country, in 2011. They claimed I was a racketeer. It was a civil case, that the whole case in Ecuador was like a sham, and I was just a greedy lawyer trying to make money from them, and using my clients to make money for myself. It's this crazy false narrative. And when they filed this case, it was covered by a lot of legal publications and like the Wall Street Journal. And I realized that they were coming after me with everything they had. Okay. That was scary, particularly because I worked alone. I worked as a solo lawyer out of my apartment in Manhattan. I was working out of my kitchen, basically. I had a kitchen table, a nice kitchen. And there were a lot of people working. We were all working.
I think I saw some of the videos. It looked like the setting.
Yeah. It was a pleasant place to work, but I'm like, holy shit. Like they're hiring the biggest law firms in America, and I'm sitting here alone in my kitchen, and they're trying to kill me. I mean, I don't mean like literally kill me, although maybe it was more like to kill my reputation.
Probably usually try and kill you a little bit differently first before they have to do the real thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's
kill you off
for sophisticated tools to basically silence someone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So my wife Laura looked at me and she said, the Wall Street Journal wrote this story, editorial called Amazon Swindle. It's basically Chevron just all but wrote it for them. And she's like,
of course they did. I mean, Chevron had the lawyers too. They did. Keep it in house.
And she's like, do you ever think you'll get your name back? My wife asked that. And listen, up to that point, I was very respected as a lawyer, like in my profession. I mean, like you were your profession, And when you're respected, you sort of get used to being respected.
You earned it.
And you earned it. Right? You work your ass off for it.
Yes.
And suddenly, in a matter of a few days, I got hit with all this negative press because I filed this lawsuit and sued me for $60 billion. And people who used to respect me were questioning me, including my own wife,
Wow.
And I don't blame her because the reality is you read this shit and it's crazy shit. Okay. And I've been to Ecuador, so many times and be like, he's a good guy, but what was he doing down there? Because I started to have doubts about me. And ultimately I told my wife, I'm like, look, just stay cool because the reality is I can't get my name back. I don't have the resources. It's never going to be like it was. But what we can do is control our own narrative and get it out there. Mm-hmm. So when people Google this case or Google me, they'll see Chevron's narrative, but they'll also see ours. And there's at least two competing narratives. So I sort of tried to keep things copacetic and cool. But when I got arrested and locked up, then things got really intense, particularly for my son.
A lot of pressure on the family. A lot of pressure on how they look at it too.
Oh, yeah. And we sort of analyzed this, and I came up with this phrase that I think is so relevant and so good, if I'm making myself credit. It's basically, my wife and I agreed that we would not let a trauma turn into a pathology. Okay? What does that mean? we're not going to talk about this case every night at dinner. It's my professional life. We're going to have a normal family as much as we can, even though we're under enormous stress. And I think we really gave that to our son. We struggled, and there were times we failed because it was so crazy. Like the day I was sentenced by this judge, and my son was in court, and all these people were there, celebrity people who had supported me and Nobel laureates, and the judge just screwed me, like sentenced me to the max of 6 months after I'd already been in detention at home for over 2 years. And I walked out of that courtroom that day. I had an appeal, so I didn't go to jail immediately. And I saw my son crying, and it killed me, sort of.
Because, you start questioning yourself. Too.
Well, as a parent, you want to deliver to your kids happiness, confidence, security, right? Yeah. It took all my money, took my freedom. He is my only kid, or only child. And took my passport, haven't left the country in 5 years. Took my ability to take my kid out to dinner, or go to the park, go to a ball game.
Sure.
And I'm a father. I'm very engaged. I love sports. I love living. I love, things like
live in New York. There's a million things to do.
And the million things, shows, theater. So, he lost a lot, but I also think he gained a lot to see what I'm describing firsthand, and also to see how I handled it. That I didn't give up. And I'd like to believe I handled it with dignity. Now, when they first sued me, this was crazy. My son was like 4 or 5, and he would sleep with us, like between me and my wife. And when it was really bad, like I really felt like my life might be like falling apart. I'm like, how do I deal with this? I need money. I don't have money to hire lawyers even to fight them. The 3 of us it was spring break, and we went on a vacation to Puerto Rico. My wife worked at a magazine. She was getting all these deals like with hotels because like the advertisers. So we're in this nice hotel in Puerto Rico, and I would go to bed like at midnight. We'd go to bed, and I couldn't sleep. Literally every night on that vacation, I'd get up at 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I was so stressed out. Trying to figure out what I should do. How do I deal with this? And I look at my son, and I'm like, I said, no matter what happens, and they might destroy you, but you've got to handle it in a way that someday when he's old enough to Google you, he can be proud of his dad. I made choices about my career where I did create this vulnerability. I didn't think something like this could ever happen in this country, but I did make choices to go after Chevron, and they have a lot of money and power, and I was probably a little too successful, and they really went after me. And I found myself in a situation that I had to deal with in a way that could make my family proud. And as much as I am devoted to my clients and like I feel their pain every day, their suffering in Ecuador, like in the end of the day, what got me up in the hardest times was needing my family to be protected and to sort of feel that I was fighting. Of course, I wanted to fight anyway, just for my own self. But man, it's deep.
So was there a decision between sort of pulling the ripcord and cutting your losses and maintaining integrity and fighting the good fight?
So I'm going to be frank with you.
Because they both offer security for the family, right?
Yeah.
Pull the ripcord. Let's just fucking cut our losses for...
So I thought of pulling the ripcord.
Sure. I'm sure by day 61, you were like,
oh yeah. I mean, I was really, there were times I was scared.
Sure.
I was scared I wasn't going to make it, like physically make it. I mean, meaning that they could do something to me that would end my life. Accident, something.
On the record now saying that that's nothing you would ever do. So if it happens that...
Yeah, to be clear.
Know that on the record, I would never do that.
I told my wife, I told some of my close friends, I said, if I end up dead somewhere, I didn't commit suicide.
Sure, I think it's fair to say.
Living with that possibility. On the other hand, it made me super proud that like we had been powerful enough and successful enough and created enough risk for this human rights violator, this company that was literally killing people. Their pollution is killing people.
Is it still?
It is still out there and still killing people. Because people are drinking contaminated water, they're getting exposed to poisons, and there's cancer all over the place. So, that we had created enough of a force that this risk did exist. And I sort of draw, as much as it scared me, I also drew strength from it, from the fact that we had this impact. And to this day,
truth does that.
Truth does that, but I'm so empowered by it. And, what's bizarre again is like I'm sitting here at this point in my life with no bank account, no law license.
Crazy.
But I feel really powerful.
I know you're buying lunch.
So I got to get people like him to hang out with me. Someone's got to buy me food.
If I'd have known that, I would have said, I'll buy you lunch. I would have provided it.
Right. But you got to keep perspective. I mean, look, there's human rights fighters in our world who get killed. I am not as dealing with half the shit other people have dealt with. I just want to keep perspective here. What's unusual, most unusual about my case is that I got put in jail by a corporation. That's never happened before.
So that leads me to kind of wrapping this up, which, I'm reading online a lot right now. There's a lot of talk about you getting pardoned.
Yeah.
What would that mean? What is the importance of that? And what would that mean to you? And then what would that do to your life if that were to happen?
So, first of all, I deserve a pardon.
And who would pardon you?
Well, the
president?
The president of the United States, whether it's...
Now, is it important that it happens now with Biden? Not 100% sure if he's going to be...
Yeah, I mean...
That's looking a little fuzzy these days, but I don't know if the timing of it is important or not.
Yeah, so it would help me a lot. It should happen now. I don't really distinguish between who the president is, and it could be anybody.
Just the president.
I am going for a pardon for whoever is the president.
Okay.
To me, this is not a political issue.
Yeah.
Like, putting someone in jail, or letting a corporation put someone in jail, is not a right-left issue. It's not a political issue. It is a rule of law issue. It's offensive to everyone who cares about the law, who cares about fairness. And I have had support from across the political spectrum. I've had support from people who deeply disagree with the idea of environmental justice work. But they're like, what happened to you is crazy. And they support me in terms of dealing with this. So this should happen for many reasons, and I hope President Biden will be the one to pardon me, and I think he should do it now or soon. If he doesn't do it, then I'm going to be continuing to ask the next president to pardon me. Now, how would it help me? First of all, I'm walking around, I'm like a good guy, a human rights guy, but I am a convicted criminal in the United States of America based on a bogus case. I want to get rid of this conviction. It's outrageous. And it's important that not only for me, but for anyone who cares about advocacy and protest and free speech and speaking out, you got to get rid of my conviction. The White House needs to send a message to America that this kind of shit can't go down in this country. It's clear this judge let it happen. The appellate court didn't deal with it. The Supreme Court wouldn't even hear my appeal. The court of last resort is a pardon for the President of the United States of America. My case is extremely important, not only to me and my family, obviously, but to the whole country in terms of what are the principles upon that we're going to stand on. And I want to say this. The United Nations has a Human Rights Council that has various human rights bodies. And I know a lot of people think the United Nations, blah, blah, blah. But let me just say this. There's a group called the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which looks at cases of people around the world who were detained illegally for political reasons, for prisoners of conscience, for example. And without me even knowing it, Amnesty International in their London office created a petition for me, filed it before this group against the U.S. government, not against Chevron. It's like a governmental thing, because I was detained. And it went before 5 highly respected international judges, and they ruled unanimously that my detention was illegal. And they ordered the U.S. government to release me and to pay me compensation for the deprivation of my liberty. It was ignored by the U.S. government. This decision was ignored, even though the U.S. government has abided by other decisions from the same body when it affects someone in detention in Iran or, a country that we don't like. So I'm not just coming out of left field. our country needs to align itself with international human rights law and how it treats people, not just here, but around the world. I happen to be a U.S. citizen who had his human rights violated in this country by our judiciary. We need to fix that.
I'd say you want to leave the country, but they took your passport.
Exactly. I can't even leave the country. Like, people are like, why don't you just go into exile? Like,
row your boat, man.
Exactly.
You probably go to Mexico. Maybe they wouldn't take you. We're taking all of them, though.
By the way, can I tell people how they can maybe help?
Sure.
So we have a website. It's called freedonziger.com. Even though I'm not walking around with an ankle bracelet, like I'm not fully free because I can't leave the country and I don't have a bank account, et cetera, et cetera. So if you go to this website, you can learn more about what we're talking about. There's articles, and you can also sign our petition for a pardon, not appeal the petition, but sign the petition is important. Give us your email. We send out newsletters, and there's also a button to donate, because the reality is you need resources to deal with.
And you're broke.
Yeah.
Kind of in debt too.
Yeah. Now, I don't have a bank account, but I do have a legal defense fund where people can donate to that pays my legal fees and some of our household expenses. My wife has a job at a nonprofit, but I can't earn income in any kind of traditional way without Chevron taking it. So we need help. The website is freedonziger.com. Go there. Learn more. If you can't help, try to.
Even just to sign the petition would be something helpful,
petition,
right?
And we just appreciate
it's the people, it's the voice, right?
It's the voice.
Gladiator, right?
That's exactly right.
This is win the people, win your freedom.
That's exactly right. And I the support is what keeps me alive and going and happy.
And motivated,
I'm motivated. Sure. One of my law school friends, we used to have these rallies every 100 days when I was locked in the apartment. I live on the 7th floor of a building in Manhattan. And all these people would gather on the street. And I had a bullhorn.
Oh
I'd go out the window, I would talk, and they'd cheer. And we'd laugh. And my friend Sarah Lee Whitson, who's also a human rights lawyer, went to law school with her. She's like, they're never going to let you out of prison until you wipe that smile off your face. I'm like, and I thought about that, because they want us to stop having fun. They want us to stop smiling. They want us to stop being hopeful about the future. They want us to think
we do a lot smarter stuff when we're happy.
Don't you think? So, I'm blessed.
We take care of each other much better.
Yes, we do. And I do feel blessed as much as I've been through. I really do. And I'm blessed to be with you today. Thank you so much for making this happen.
I hope that all of your goals are accomplished, and I hope that you are freed from this.
Thank you so
allow
much.
yourself, be able to live the life that you want to live as a land of the free. It'd be nice if that was true.
Thank you so much. Really
Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Right?
Was that good?
That's one of my favorite interviews.
Oh my God, I mean so much.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.